My graduation day should have been the culmination of everything I'd worked for. Instead, it became the moment I was physically dragged out of the ceremony, just minutes before my valedictorian speech. The weight of the gown on my shoulders felt less like fabric and more like 4 years of sleepless nights, caffeine-fueled study sessions, and the relentless gnawing fear that I wasn't good enough. But standing there in the cavernous, buzzing arena, I finally felt like I was. The air was thick with the scent of hairspray and nervous excitement. A sea of identical black caps and gowns surrounded me, but in that moment, I felt unique. I had done it. Not only had I graduated, but I had clawed my way to the very top. My name was Imani Jackson, and I was the valedictorian of Northwood University's graduating class. My family was seated in the third row, a prime spot my dad had arrived 3 hours early to snag. My mom was already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her smile so wide it looked like it hurt. My dad, a man whose pride usually simmered quietly beneath a stoic surface, was practically vibrating with it. And my little brother, Leo, was squirming in his seat, trying to get a better view past the wall of adults in front of him. I caught my dad's eye, and he gave me a slow, deliberate nod. It was his version of a standing ovation, and it meant more to me than any applause ever could. The preliminary speeches began, a drone of administrative thank yous and platitudes that washed over the crowd. I wasn't really listening. I was running my own speech over and over in my head, the note cards tucked into the sleeve of my robe feeling both reassuring and terrifying. I'd written it not for the faculty or the donors, but for the students like me. The ones who had to work twice as hard to get half as far. The ones who felt like imposters every time they stepped into a lecture hall. My speech was about finding your voice when the world tries to silence you. The irony of that was about to become painfully clear. The trouble started quietly. Leo, all of 7 years old, couldn't see a thing. He kept standing on his chair, and my dad, ever the problem solver, gently asked the woman in front of them if they could just shift a few inches so he could see. It was a simple, polite request. But the woman wasn't just any woman. It was Mrs. Davenport. Her daughter, Brittany, was the salutatorian, the runner-up. And for the past 4 years, Mrs. Davenport had treated me with a kind of frosty disdain that could chill an entire room. She seemed to view my academic success not as an achievement, but as a personal insult to her family's legacy. She turned around, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "These are our seats. We were here on time. Perhaps if you had been more organized, your son would have a better view." My dad, a patient man who'd worked construction his entire life and dealt with far worse, just held up his hands. "No trouble, ma'am. I was just asking. He's excited to see his sister." "I'm sure he is," Mrs. Davenport sniffed, turning back around and pointedly adjusting her pearl necklace. Brittany, sitting next to her, shot a smug little smirk over her shoulder that made my blood boil. I tried to let it go. It was my day. Her bitterness couldn't touch me. But then Leo, in a last-ditch attempt to see, leaned a little too far and his small water bottle tumbled from his lap, rolling under Mrs. Davenport's seat. He whispered, "Daddy, my water," his voice filled with tiny person panic. My dad leaned down to retrieve it. His hand had barely passed under the seat when Mrs. Davenport shrieked. It wasn't a small yelp, it was a full-throated theatrical scream, as if a snake had just bitten her. "He touched me! This man just put his hands on me!" she yelled, pointing a trembling, perfectly manicured finger at my father. The entire section went quiet. Heads turned. My dad shot up, his face a mask of bewildered horror. "Ma'am, I was just getting my son's water bottle. I didn't touch you." "Liar!" she screeched, clutching her arm. "You people are always so aggressive. You can't just follow the rules like everyone else. You have to cause a scene." You people. The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. My mom's face fell, the joy draining out of her like air from a balloon. I saw security approaching from the aisle, two uniformed officers with tired, stern faces. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't happening. Not today. I quickly left my seat in the graduate section and hurried over, my gown billowing behind me. "Excuse me, officer," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "There's been a misunderstanding. My dad was just picking up my brother's water bottle." Mrs. Davenport rounded on me. "Oh, look, the whole family is in on it, probably trying to steal my purse. I want them removed. I don't feel safe." The security guard, a burly man whose name tag read Miller, looked from Mrs. Davenport's histrionic performance to my father's stunned face, and then to me in my cap and gown. He sighed, the weary sigh of a man who just wanted his shift to end. "Ma'am, let's all just calm down," he said, directing his words to my mom. "We are calm," my dad said, his voice low and dangerous. "He's threatening me now," Mrs. Davenport cried, putting a hand to her forehead as if she were about to faint. "Officer, do your job." It was a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. People were staring, whispering. I could feel their judgment, their suspicion. They didn't see a proud family celebrating their daughter's achievement. They saw what Mrs. Davenport wanted them to see, a disruption, a threat. "All right, that's enough," Officer Miller said, his patience gone. He looked at my dad. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you and your family to come with me." "What? We haven't done anything," I protested, stepping between the officer and my father. "I'm the valedictorian. I'm supposed to give a speech." The officer barely glanced at me. His eyes were cold. "And you'll miss it if you don't cooperate. This is a private event. We have the right to remove anyone causing a disturbance." "She's the one causing the disturbance," I insisted, my voice rising in panic as the second officer began to escort my family toward the exit. My mom was trying to comfort a now crying Leo. My dad looked utterly defeated. I stood my ground. "You can't do this. This is my graduation." Officer Miller took a step toward me. His voice dropped. "Listen, young lady. Either you go back to your seat and let us handle this, or you're going out with them. Your choice." I looked over at Mrs. Davenport. She was watching me, a triumphant, venomous gleam in her eyes. She had won. She was robbing my family of this moment, robbing me of it. And in that instant, a hot wave of defiance washed over me. I wasn't going to sit back down. I wasn't going to let her win. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady, though my insides were a mess of nuts. "If they go, I go." That was all he needed to hear. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. The shock of it jolted through me. He was actually touching me, forcing me. I was a scholar, an honoree, the top student in a class of thousands, and I was being manhandled like a criminal. He started marching me up the aisle, away from the stage, away from my future. The crowd was a blur of faces, some shocked, some smug, some indifferent. As we reached the heavy double doors of the arena, I twisted my head for one last look. I saw Mrs. Davenport, settling back into her seat, smoothing her skirt with a satisfied smile. The door swung shut behind me with a heavy, final thud, plunging me into the quiet, sterile light of the hallway. My speech, the one tucked inside my robe about finding your voice, felt like a lead weight against my heart. I was the valedictorian, and I had just been thrown out of my own graduation. The quiet of the hallway was deafening after the roar of the arena. It smelled of floor wax and stale air conditioning. My brother's sobs were sharp, hiccuping sounds that echoed off the polished concrete walls.
My mom held him tight, murmuring soothing words, but her own eyes were glassy with unshed tears of fury and humiliation. My dad stood ramrod straight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, a vein pulsing in his temple. He was a volcano of silent rage, and I knew he was holding it back for our sake. "Protocol," Officer Miller said, his voice flat and unapologetic as he spoke into his shoulder radio. "Disturbance handled, escorting 3 adults and 1 minor from the premises." "Premises?" I shot back, my voice dangerously high. "This is my university. I'm a student here, or I was 5 minutes ago. You can't just throw us out based on the word of a woman who has had it in for me for 4 years. My job is not to mediate high school drama," he grunted, not even looking at me. "My job is to remove threats to security. Mrs. Davenport felt threatened. End of story." "A threat? My father is a deacon at his church. My brother is 7 years old." My voice cracked. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. I looked at the second officer, a younger man who at least had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet my eyes. They saw a problem to be managed, not a family being wronged. They saw my father's skin color, heard Mrs. Davenport's accusation, and their brains connected the dots in the ugliest, most predictable way. "You have to let us back in," I pleaded, my anger giving way to desperation. "Please, my speech." "Your speech is the last thing on my mind right now," Miller said dismissively. "You can collect your diploma by mail." Each word was a slap in the face. All those years of work, of sacrifice, erased in a moment by a malicious lie and a security guard on a power trip. I could hear the muffled sound of applause from inside the arena. They were probably announcing the scholarship winners. My name would be on that list. I had won 3 of them. And I was out here in a service corridor being treated like a trespasser. Just as Miller was about to herd us toward the exit doors, another door swung open down the hall. A man in academic robes, the university president's chief of staff, came striding out, looking flustered. He was followed by a figure I knew well, Dean Albright, the Dean of Student Affairs. He was a good man, one of the few administrators who made a point of knowing students' names. He'd personally congratulated me when the valedictorian announcement was made. He saw us, and his brisk walk faltered. His brow furrowed in confusion. "Imani? Mr. and Mrs. Jackson? What's going on here? Shouldn't you be inside?" Hope, fierce and painful, flared in my chest. "Imani," I said, stepping forward. "Thank God. This officer, he just threw us out." Officer Miller immediately puffed out his chest. "Sir, these individuals were causing a disturbance. We had a complaint from another guest." "She's lying," I interrupted, the whole story tumbling out of me in a frantic rush. The seating, Leo's water bottle, Mrs. Davenport's shriek, the accusation. I made sure he heard the 2 words that had poisoned the entire exchange. She said, "You people are always so aggressive." She called us "you people, Dean." The Dean's eyes, which had been darting between me and the officer, locked onto mine. The confusion on his face slowly hardened into a cold, focused anger. He looked at my dad, who simply said, "Sir, I was retrieving my son's water bottle." That is all that happened. The quiet dignity in my father's voice was more powerful than any shouting could ever be. Dean Albright turned his gaze on Officer Miller. It was like watching the sun disappear behind a storm cloud. He looked at Officer. It was like ice. "Officer, did you or did you not just eject the 2024 university valedictorian and her family from the commencement ceremony minutes before she was scheduled to speak?" Miller's bravado began to crumble. "Sir, I was following procedure. There was a complaint of assault." "An accusation of assault," the dean corrected, his voice like ice. "From a woman whose daughter just happens to be the salutatorian, the very student Imani beat for this honor. Did you even attempt to get another witness's account? Did you ask anyone at all, what they saw?" Well, no, sir. The situation was escalating. The situation is about to escalate far beyond what you can imagine, Dean Albright cut him off. He pulled out his phone and typed a furious text. Then he looked at us, his face etched with profound apology. Mr. and Mrs. Jackson, Imani, on behalf of Northwood University, I am so deeply, deeply sorry. This is an unacceptable failure on every level.
He turned back to the security guards. You will stand down. You will not prevent this family from re-entering the arena. Is that understood? The younger officer nodded immediately, but Miller hesitated, his face a mottled red. Sir, with all due respect, my supervisor will be speaking with me and the university president in about 5 minutes, the dean finished for him. Now, step aside. It felt like a monumental victory, but my heart was still pounding with leftover fear and adrenaline. My mom was wiping her face, trying to compose herself. My dad put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing it gently. Just then, a muffled voice came through the doors, the voice of the university provost from the podium. An exceptional young woman with a 4.0 GPA, please join me in welcoming our salutatorian, Brittany Davenport. A wave of polite applause filtered through the doors. Brittany, of course, her moment of triumph, bought and paid for with her mother's lie. A bitter taste filled my mouth. Dean Albright's eyes widened in alarm. He looked at his watch, then at me. My cap was tilted, my gown was rumpled, and I could feel the tracks of tears, now dried, on my cheeks. I was a mess. Imani, he said, his voice urgent. That's Brittany's speech. You're next. They'll introduce you the second she's done. We have maybe 5 minutes, tops. I know this is, I can't even imagine, but the stage is waiting. Can you do it? Can you go back in there right now? Can I do it? The question hung in the air, a 1,000-pound weight. 5 minutes ago, I was being physically removed from the building, my dreams turning to ash in my hands. Now I was being asked to walk back in there, head held high, and deliver the most important speech of my life. My mind was a whirlwind of rage, humiliation, and a paralyzing sense of injustice. The note cards in my sleeve suddenly felt foreign, the words I'd so carefully crafted belonging to a different person, a naive, hopeful girl who believed in merit and hard work above all else. That girl had been dragged out into the hallway, and her optimism had been beaten out of her. My dad's hand was still on my shoulder, a solid, grounding presence. He leaned in close, his voice a low rumble just for me. Imani, he said, and I could hear the lifetime of lessons he taught me packed into that single word. You look them in the eye, you hold your head up, you let them hear your voice. Don't you let them take that from you. Not today. His words were the steel I needed for my spine. I looked at my mom, who was frantically trying to smooth my hair and straighten my cap, her hands still trembling. She met my gaze, her eyes fierce. You show them, baby, she whispered. You show every single one of them who Imani Jackson is. I took a deep, shaky breath and nodded at Dean Albright. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Yes, I can do it. Relief washed over the dean's face. Good, good girl. Let's go. There's a side entrance to the stage. We can get you there without you having to walk through the crowd again. He turned to my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Jackson, I'll have someone escort you to the presidential box seats, front and center. You will see your daughter give her speech. He spoke into his phone, barking orders, and things began to happen with an almost comical speed. A young woman in a university blazer appeared, apologizing profusely as she led my family away in one direction. Dean Albright grabbed my arm, gently this time, and hurried me down a different corridor. The muffled sound of Brittany Davenport's voice droned on through the walls, a saccharine speech about friendship and memories that I was sure her mother had helped her write. Each word was a reminder of the ugly scene that had just unfolded. We reached a small door marked Stage Access. The dean paused, putting his hands on my shoulders and looking me directly in the eye. Imani,
What happened out there was a disgrace. It never should have happened. But what you do in the next 10 minutes, that's what they'll remember. Not the mess in the hallway. Just you. Are you ready? I clutched the note cards in my hand. My original speech was about overcoming obstacles, about the metaphorical walls you have to break down. It suddenly felt quaint, almost dishonest. The obstacles I was facing weren't metaphorical at all. They had names and faces and wore security uniforms. They tried to silence you not with subtle discouragement, but with brute force. "I'm ready," I said, a new, hard resolve solidifying inside me. He opened the door, and we were plunged into the warm, buzzing darkness backstage. I could see the sliver of the brightly lit stage through the heavy velvet curtains. The applause for Brittany was dying down. The provost was walking back to the podium. This was it. And now, the provost's voice boomed, amplified by the arena sound system, "It is my distinct honor to introduce a student whose academic achievements are matched only by her dedication to her community. A young woman who embodies the very spirit of Northwood University. Graduating summa cum laude with a degree in political science. Please welcome your 2024 valedictorian, Imani Jackson." My heart leaped into my throat. The curtain was pulled back. Dean Albright gave me a final encouraging nod. I took a step forward, into the blinding glare of the spotlights. The applause was a thunderous wave. It washed over me, a stark contrast to the cold silence of the hallway. For a moment, I was disoriented. I could barely make out the thousands of faces in the crowd. I walked toward the podium, my legs feeling like they were made of wood. My eyes scanned the front rows, searching. And then I saw them, my family, right there in the front row of the special seating section, just as the dean had promised. My dad was on his feet, clapping so hard his hands were a blur. My mom was openly weeping now, but her tears were tears of pride. Even Leo was standing on his chair, waving a small university flag with all his might. The sight of them, safe and proud, was the only thing that kept me from crumbling. Then my eyes drifted a few rows back. I saw Mrs. Davenport. She was frozen in her seat, her perfectly coiffed head tilted to the side. Her face was a mask of utter uncomprehending shock. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Next to her, Brittany was pale, her salutatorian medal looking like a cheap trinket around her neck. They had thought they'd won. They had thought they'd silenced me. And here I was, standing at the podium with the attention of the entire arena focused solely on me. I laid my note cards on the lectern. I looked down at the carefully typed words, words about dreams and journeys, words that now felt like a lie. I could still feel the phantom grip of Officer Miller's fingers on my arm. I could still hear the ugly slur Mrs. Davenport had spat at my family. I couldn't stand up here and pretend none of that had happened. I couldn't give a speech about finding my voice when I had just come so terrifyingly close to having it stopped from me. I looked up, letting my eyes sweep across the vast crowd. I saw the faces of my professors, my friends, my fellow graduates. I saw the bored faces of the security guards stationed by the exits, including the younger one who had stood by and done nothing. And I made a decision. I pushed the note cards to the side of the lectern. I gripped its edges, my knuckles turning white, and leaned into the microphone. I took a breath, the silence in the arena stretching out, thick with anticipation. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice clear and amplified, filling every corner of the vast space. About 15 minutes ago, I was not sure I would be able to deliver this speech. You see, I was not backstage preparing. I was in the hallway, being forcibly ejected from this arena by university security. A collective gasp rippled through the arena. It was a soft, sharp intake of breath from thousands of people at once. The polite, celebratory atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a tense, electric silence. Every eye was locked on me. I saw Dean Albright standing in the wings, his face pale. I saw the university president shift uncomfortably in his plush front row seat. and I saw Mrs. Davenport, whose face had gone from shocked to a sickly mottled gray. She looked like she was trying to shrink into her seat. I was told I was a disturbance, I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The microphone carried my voice with a cold, steady clarity. My family, my father, my mother, and my 7-year-old brother were also removed. Why? Because my little brother couldn't see, and my father politely asked a guest if she might shift her seat. His crime was trying to retrieve my brother's fallen water bottle. Her response was to shriek that he had assaulted her, to accuse him, to accuse us of being aggressive. I paused, letting the word hang in the air, to refer to us as you people. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder, angrier. I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was giving voice to 1,000 slights, 1,000,000 moments of casual cruelty that so many people in that room had endured in silence. I could feel a shift in the energy of the crowd, from passive audience to engaged witnesses. For a moment, in that hallway, I believed the lie, I confessed, my voice thick with emotion. I believed that my 4 years of hard work, of late nights in the library, of earning the grades that put me on this very stage, could be erased by one person's prejudice and one security guard's blind compliance. They tried to take my voice. They tried to take my family's pride. They tried to take this moment. I looked directly at my parents. My dad was standing now, not clapping, but just watching me, his face a complex mask of pain and immense, overwhelming pride. My mom's hand was over her mouth, her tears flowing freely. My speech, the one I wrote on these cards, I said, gesturing to the forgotten note cards on the lectern, was about finding your voice. It was about the power of speaking up against injustice. I had no idea when I wrote it that I would be forced to live it so literally, just minutes before walking on stage. The real lesson from my 4 years at Northwood University didn't happen in a classroom. It happened in that corridor. It's the lesson that your credentials, your accomplishments, your cap and gown, they will not always protect you. It's the lesson that sometimes the only thing standing between you and being silenced is the raw courage to speak your own truth, even when your voice is shaking. I took a breath and looked out at my fellow graduates. So, to the class of 2024, I say this: don't just go out there and succeed. Go out there and be courageous. When you see an injustice, big or small, don't turn away. Don't be a bystander. Use the privilege of your education to speak for those who are being silenced, because, as I learned today, silence is the oxygen that bigotry breathes. Don't let it breathe. I hadn't planned to say any of it, but the words felt more true than anything I had ever written. I looked over at the Davenport family one last time. Brittany was staring at the floor, mortified, but Mrs. Davenport was now being spoken to by another more senior-looking security official. People around her were shifting away, creating a small, isolated island of shame. The whispers had turned into pointed stares. Her social standing was evaporating before my eyes. Thank you, I finished simply, and congratulations to the class of 2024. We did it. For a second, there was dead silence. Then a single person in the student section stood up and started clapping. Then another and another. Within seconds, the entire student body was on its feet. The applause wasn't polite anymore. It was a roar. It was a standing ovation not just for a valedictorian, but for a truth that had been spoken out loud. The faculty section rose next, then the parents. The sound was deafening, a wave of validation and support that washed away every last trace of the humiliation I had felt in the hallway. It was thunderous, and it was for me. As I walked away from the podium, Dean Albright met me. His eyes were shining. "Imani," he said, his voice thick, "that was the best commencement address I have ever heard." The university president was right behind him, his hand extended. He shook my hand firmly, his face a mixture of apology and awe. "Miss Jackson, we have a lot to talk about. Changes will be made. I promise you that." I didn't stay for the rest of the ceremony. I walked off the stage and straight into my father's arms. He held me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I am so proud of you," he whispered into my hair. "I have never been more proud." We left the arena as a family, walking out into the bright afternoon sun. We didn't need to see the rest. My graduation had already happened. It wasn't about getting a piece of paper. It was about finding my voice in the face of ugliness and using it, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been told to be quiet. The future felt uncertain, but for the first time all day, it also felt entirely mine. They hadn't taken my moment, they had given me a platform.